there, Karen again. Last time we talked about Jackie Farmer, one of who was actually Charlotte Ward, one of the earliest of the Hampstead Hoax promoters. But of course there are promoters who go way back further than that, and probably the best known of those is Sabine McNeill. She was arrested multiple times during the course of the past 4 years, basically, was tried on 21 different counts on her indictment, including 4 counts of stalking and 17 of breach of restraining order. We'll get into that a little bit further on. And the result of that is that she was sentenced to 12 years in prison, which was reduced to 9 on account of her age because she's 74 years old. Now, what is a 74-year-old lady mucking about in something like the Hampstead hoax? And well, you might ask. It seems that this is definitely not Sabine's first rodeo. She has been involved in multiple cases prior to this, most of them having to do with family court, and none of them ever successful. She worked alongside Belinda Mackenzie, and together they had something called the Association of Mackenzie Friends, which seemed basically to be a cover for them to promote various conspiracy ideas about how the social services are stealing children and selling them into sexual slavery and murdering them and all sorts of horrible things. We can get a little bit more into that a bit later on too. We know some of Sabine's history, and I'd like to get into that, and let's start with some of her earlier cases, one of which had a striking resemblance to some of the factors in the Hampstead hoax. So Vicki Hague is an interesting case. She, like Ella Draper, had an ex-partner, well, in this case her ex-husband, who she really did not wish to have contact with her daughter. And she, again, like Ella, tried a number of different things to try and keep the husband away, and ultimately she resorted to making allegations against him that he had sexually abused the child. Now, this sounds a little bit familiar, but wait, it gets better. Now, like Ella Draper and Abraham Christie, Vicki Hague coached her little girl to make allegations of sexual abuse against her father. She wound up there was an investigation, obviously, and the little girl was subjected to 4 different medical examinations, none of which revealed anything untoward at all. And ultimately, it became very clear that this was simply, a stitch-up. The judge in this case, Sir Nicholas Wall, had this to say in his 2011 judgment on the case. As a result of inappropriate pressures and prompting, X came to make and believe the allegations. The mother used allegations of sexual abuse manipulatively as part of her irrational and long-standing hostility to contact which she sought to obstruct. While professing her concern for X's well-being, the mother consistently prioritized her own needs over those of her daughter, and the court found in favor of the father, and that's how that particular case ended. The interesting part about this for us, I mean, aside from the fact that it bears a lot of resemblance to the Hampstead case, is that we know that Sabine McNeill was involved with it. Now, another person was involved in this case, a person named Elizabeth Watson, and she seems to have become involved as a support to the mother, and she calls herself an investigator. She also refers to herself as, I believe, Elizabeth of the family Watson, which tells us that she has leanings towards the Freemen on the Land or sovereign citizen movement, and she was apparently either working with or alongside Sabine McNeill in getting this case into the public eye. Now, I'm just going to read you a little bit of the judgment and what the judge had to say about this. In the judgment, Sir Nicholas Wall said, "Miss Hague has not been able to accept the findings of either judge. What renders the case unique, however, is that Miss Hague, aided and abetted by one Elizabeth Watson, is not only unable to accept the judge's findings, but has put into the public domain the false allegations that she has not had justice and that X, contrary to both judges' findings, has been sexually abused by her father. Those allegations have been posted on the World Wide Web, it was a while ago, and are in the public domain. In addition, the mother has circulated the allegations to the parents at X's school and to her ex-partner's fellow employees at his place of work. All this, of course, has been done illicitly and in breach of the orders of the court." That, again, has a little familiar ring to it. Now, there was an interesting article about this on a blog called Head of Legal, and I'm going to leave the link to that below this video. But one of the things that I found interesting is that Elizabeth Watson insists that she was not the one running the internet campaign. And I'm not sure how much credence I would give to that, except that she names a blog, Victims Unite, which we know from Sabine's 2018 trial belonged to Sabine McNeill. I will read you a little bit of what Elizabeth says about this. She says, "I am an investigator, not a campaigner. This is a major misconception that is being bandied about in the blogosphere. Any careful examination of the facts will reveal that the campaigning was done by Sabine McNeill, who is living most of the time outside of the jurisdiction in Germany, which seems to be shielding her. This is a gross and unjust situation where I have been blamed for what others have campaigned, and I and my lawyers pressed Ms. McNeill to remove all reference to the case. I had nothing to do with what she had published and campaigned, and I intend to get this misconception corrected." And so then she goes on to demand an apology from the blogger and so on and so forth. Now, it's interesting because in the judgment they do mention that various things were published on Victims Unite, and it's not possible to actually check that any longer because as a result of the 2018 judgment on Sabine McNeill, that blog has been removed. However, I do understand from looking at the Wayback Machine that there are references to it having contained material about Vicki Hague. So there we have Sabine involved in a family court thing where she's basically taking the same role that she did in the Hampstead case, except she didn't have videos of the child to spread all over the internet, and essentially using a family court case to project her own particular views about the court system and the child welfare system. Now, all of this might seem somewhat irrelevant to the Hampstead case, except that the MO is so very, very similar. There were children who were alleged to have been sexually abused by the father. There was coaching going on. The children themselves were turned into little sock puppets of the mother who wanted them taken away from the father, and Sabine got involved on the side of the abusive parent. Sabine and Belinda did become involved in other cases. Some notable ones include Melissa Laird, a lady who was deported back to the United States and her children kept in care in the UK. And that was basically because she had been neglecting and subjecting her child to her own mental illness, which included having a huge collection of dogs who bit. And the child was covered in dog bites and was malnourished and apparently had been emotionally and intellectually neglected in his short life. The state saw fit to take him away from her, and Belinda and Sabine saw fit to try and have him returned to her because apparently they don't think that's child abuse. That one ended up with Sabine and Belinda going to court. I believe that was about 2 years ago. And the reason for that was that they had tried to put in a judicial review on the case, which had failed, and the court judged that they should be assessed costs. They wound up not having to pay the costs, and those costs were downloaded to their unfortunate client, who is unlikely to ever pay them because she's back in the United States, and what are they going to do, extradite her? So yeah, that was one case. Another one is the Moosas, which we talked about in our video about Charlotte Ward, Jackie Farmer. Charlotte became involved along with Belinda and Sabine, and in that one they were attempting to have children returned to their parents, who believed that the children were possessed by devils, and attempted to have the children exorcised or whatever by beating them with wires and sticks and brooms and hoovers. While the case was going on, they gave some form of morphine, codeine type thing to the baby, less than a year old. And so clearly these again were abusive parents, and clearly Sabine and Belinda really, really, really wanted them returned to these abusive parents. You sort of have to ask yourself why this is, and it really does come down to a political agenda, which they have explicated on several occasions, and it has to do with their idea that children are snatched by the state for no particular reason, and that parents have a right to do as they wish with their children. So we've established that Sabine had an MO. She was used to dealing with cases in which children had been abused and overlooking that abuse. She was used to publicizing cases and using every means at her disposal to bring public attention to what she claimed were the injustices of the family court. And she had some experience with parents who were willing to lie about other parents and tell horrible stories about them in order to win their children back, because of course winning is everything, as we all know. That was sarcasm there, just in case you were wondering. So coming into the Hampstead hoax, she had basically the tools at her disposal. She had the community aware of who she was. She'd been doing this for some time now. She'd been working with Belinda Mackenzie since 2011 as the Association of Mackenzie Friends. And coming into the Hampstead hoax, she was well prepared. So we've established that Sabine had the tools at her disposal and the audience that she required to make the Hampstead hoax go viral. All she needed was for Ella to hand over those the children's videos and the 11-page document, and she was off to the races. So I would like to talk now a little bit about some of the arrests that Sabine was subjected to, and then about her experiences with the court system, because it's interesting that one of the charges, I guess, that gets leveled against the people who oppose the hoax, i.e. us, is that the police and courts and government are all very kindly disposed to covering up the Hampstead hoax. I would contend that the police, the courts, and the government were incredibly lax and failed to do their duty in arresting and apprehending Sabine and stopping her in her tracks. For example, she was arrested when she returned from Germany, and that's all well and good. She was arrested at the Royal Courts of Justice while she was watching Ella's appeal to her to the family court decision, and she kicked up a huge fuss, which of course we all expected. And then there was hemming and hawing, and the police kind of mumbled and didn't say too much. And in December of that year, her case was NFA'd, meaning no further action. So why did that happen? It was pretty clear from all of the evidence that she had basically organized and put out the videos. She had admitted to having put out the videos. It was clear from evidence that came up in her 2018 trial. It was very clear that the evidence was there that she had done it. So why did the police not bother pursuing it in 2015 when they could have, and essentially just stopped the whole thing right there. They NFA'd it, and then they went on, and next thing you know, I believe about a month later, she got arrested along with Neelu Berry, and that was because Neelu had been involved in one of the church demonstrations, and she had been charged with that. That fell through because the CPS didn't bother to turn up to her trial. Bit of a problem there, dudes. And so they dismissed the case. However, she took the witness statements from that case, handed them to Sabine, and Sabine published them on her blog. Those witness statements contained not only personal information about the witnesses in that particular trial, but also their, phone numbers, their email addresses, etc. That was now all on the internet for everyone to see. So they were actually charged with witness intimidation, and that trial happened in the summer of 2016. Now, as we know, Neelu goes through this long rigmarole about why she thinks that it was dropped. What really happened was that there was a lapse in the police handling of the case, and some material that should have been in the police record wasn't, and therefore at halftime submission, while the jury was out of the room, which the jury is always out of the room at the halftime submission, that's just how it is, the judge agreed with the submission that the case should be made no case to answer. Having determined on the Friday afternoon that there was no case to answer, the judge said at the time that he was minded to put in place restraining orders which would prevent this kind of thing from happening in future. At the time, it seemed a bit of a weak gesture, but we were, what are you going to do? You can't change it. And so the jury came back in on the Monday morning. The judge instructed them that they were to deliver a verdict of not guilty because there was no case to answer. And then he put in place the restraining orders. The restraining orders are available on the blog, and I will put a link to those under this video if you'd like to go and have a look at them. But basically they just say that Sabine and Neelu are both not permitted to speak of any of the witnesses who were in that case, and nor are they allowed to refer to the school or the church or any of the witnesses or any of the children at that school in terms of satanic abuse, cannibalism, ritual abuse, etc. So that really is kind of a firm restraining order, and that actually proved very, very helpful in the years to come, because in fact that was why much of the reason that the police were able to gather evidence that Sabine had violated the restraining order multiple times, and that this needed to go to trial. Now, that wasn't all there was to the trial, of course. There were the 4 stalking charges, which in the grand scheme of things were really much more important, but the restraining order gave them a sort of something to hang their hat on, something that they could say, yes, she has done this, and then we'll examine the stalking charges as well. So I don't propose to go through every aspect of the restraining order and every time she violated it, nor every time she got arrested, because honestly it got really hard to count after a while. However, the restraining order she managed to violate it, I believe, within 2 weeks of it having been imposed. She spent a weekend in jail at the police station while she was processed, and then I believe she did it again a month later. She went to court in October of 2016, so this is only a few months after the restraining order was actually issued in July of that year, and she actually pleaded guilty, surprising everyone, and at that time the judge told her that she really needed to re-examine her life. that she really needed to drop all this foolishness and go on with her life and try to put it behind her. However, he was not counting on the person that Sabine is, and she completely ignored that advice. As we've talked about recently on the blog, we find her being, quote, invited to the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse Truth Project, where she apparently prepared a large document to do with the Hampstead case and read that aloud at the Truth Project. Unfortunately, there's no way to completely verify this because it's an anonymized project. However, we apparently someone at the Telegraph has seen documentation that this did occur. So I'm willing to go with that unless I see it proven otherwise. In any case, moving along, she continued to violate her restraining order at, an epic pace. And sure enough, by, I guess it was the fall of 2017, when they finally arrested her and charged her with all of the restraining order violations that she'd managed to pile up to date. There were 17 of them. They also charged her with the 4 stalking charges. Now, just a quick word about those stalking charges. For all of the people who think that this was a stitch-up and the police were in on it from the beginning, I just want to say the people who brought those charges had to fight like dogs to get those charges heard. The CPS was not willing at first to look at them because they just thought it would be too difficult a case to fight. And so they had to, the complainants actually had to do something called a VRR, a Victim's Right to Review, and get the CPS to reconsider that decision. That took them a full year. So a full year of going through the horror of knowing that your child's pictures and stories about your children are continuing to be spread on the internet, and that you're continuing to get threats and daily updates on what the world thinks you're doing as a Satanist who eats children. And it took them a full year of plugging to get this thing through. That is really not acceptable. Just not acceptable. I'm going to read to you from the first day of the trial, in which the prosecution laid out the charges, just so you have some idea of exactly what it was that Sabine was charged with and how it affected people. The prosecutor, who was a very, very skilled and excellent prosecutor, I have to say, once they got it to court, they did a fabulous job. I thought very, very highly of the entire team, and I thought highly of Sabine's team as well. I think they all did really well. I feel as though Sabine's team did not have a whole lot to work with, unfortunately, because she refused to admit that she'd done anything wrong. Okay, so anyhow, here's how it went on the first day, just so you get a sense of it. Charges 1 to 4 allege that between 2015 and 2017, Sabine pursued a course of conduct which amounted to stalking 4 individuals who were named as alleged satanic child abusers by Ella Draper in 2014. Now, it says 4 people. Clearly, there were more than 4 people involved in being named. These 4 people were essentially the ones left standing, because it's really hard to fight this kind of thing. And they were the ones who had the courage to stand up in court and talk publicly about what had happened to them. Now, their names can't be shared to protect their children, but these people, I think, are incredibly brave, and I think they are owed a lot of respect. Sabine's actions caused these people serious alarm or distress, which had a significant effect on their day-to-day activities. The prosecution contends that Sabine either knew or ought to have known that her actions would cause these persons alarm. Now, that's actually part of the Protection from Harassment Act 1997, which lays out the what constitutes harassment that would be called stalking. Miranda Moore, that's the prosecutor, said that Sabine put online false allegations of satanic abuse and that her online activities encouraged people to take direct action against the children of the individuals in question. Sabine published material encouraging people to kidnap or take away the children, all based on a complete fiction. As a result, the people involved have had to change their lives drastically. Not only were their families investigated by social services to determine whether they were sexually abusing their children, but they have suffered from ruined businesses and have had to deal with unimaginable emotional and physical impacts. Stalking is a crime which takes place over a period of time and has a cumulative effect, Moore said. She provided details regarding the stalking charges, noting that on or before the 6th of February 2015, Sabine had made the videos of Child P and Child Q available online. Sabine also suggested that members of the public ought to paint Barbie-type dolls with red nail varnish and post them to the alleged cult members. Sabine named the children of the individuals and published their personal details of their parents' addresses, phone numbers, email addresses, and places of work. She posted allegations that the children of these people had been sexually abused in terrible ways by their own parents and other people, and published images of some of the children online. Sabine posted a link to printable flyers headlined, "Is Your Child Safe?" These flyers contained allegations of satanic child rape and murder, and were intended to be placed under windshield wipers on cars in the Hampstead area. Indeed, this is what happened. Furthermore, Moore said, Sabine supported Rupert Quaintance in his plan to come to the UK to cause chaos in the Hampstead community. She not only contributed to his GoFundMe account, but offered him bed and board on his arrival. Now, down in the breach of restraining order section, it says Moore explained that the restraining order in question was issued following the collapse of Sabine McNeill and Neelu Berry's trial for conspiracy to commit witness intimidation in July 2016, so I've already gone through that. The details of this restraining order included contacting directly or indirectly, by herself or by any person acting as her agent, or by any means whatsoever, any of the following persons. The list of people named cannot be published, but includes any person who, to the knowledge of Sabine McNeill, is or has been clergy at Christ Church, Hampstead Square, London, etc., or the staff or pupil at Christ Church Primary School, Christ Church Hill, London, etc. While counts 5 to 19 in the indictment involve electronic breaches of the restraining order, counts 20 and 21 are not electronic. She changes her method and goes analog, Moore says. That's what happened when Sabine was under house arrest. She was not allowed to use her computer, and therefore she took basically flyers to the Anglican Church of England General Synod, which was taking place in February 2018, and then she further went on to try to talk to a helpline about the case, when she had specifically been told that she could not do this. And then Moore talks about the Hampstead hoax, so we won't get into that. We've already talked about that a little bit here. But that gives you some sense of what the jury heard that day. It was much longer than that, and I think Miranda Moore is a much better speaker than I am. But it was really long. It was very difficult in the sense that there were logistical difficulties, partly to do with Sabine not wanting to get on the prison bus to come to the court, and that caused all sorts of delays and issues, and partly also because various of Sabine's friends came to the court and caused problems, including things like filming people out on the veranda of the court, and possibly endangering the jury and therefore the trial, and there was, contempt of court happening. There were pictures being taken in the courtroom, or in the court corridors rather. There was material about the witnesses, naming them or using their initials, that was being published online. And so in the end, 2 other people besides Sabine actually wound up with criminal records because of this. One of them was Eddie Is Okay, whose real name is Edgar John, an evangelical conspiracy person, I guess, who came to the court at the urging of Angela Power Disney, about whom much more later in a later video, I think. And he came and was photographing people in the halls and also on the porch, the veranda of the court. And so yeah, it was a bit of a shit show. Not nearly as much as the 2016 one, which actually the last day of that one was unspeakably, horribly hilarious, and it's pretty much required reading. It's pretty funny. The other person who was arrested, of course, was Belinda Mackenzie, and that was for having published on her Facebook page, and I believe in a bulk email which was sent out. She published the names of people who were witnesses in the trial. The trial was under a reporting restriction, and there has been some debate about that in the hoaxer community, because they're convinced that in reporting on the trial, we were violating the reporting restriction. I'm going to say this again and see if it sinks in this time. The reporting restriction meant that we were not allowed to name any of the witnesses who were protected in order to protect their children. Therefore, we could report on the trial. Anyone could report on the trial if they wanted to, but they could not name the witnesses. That's just the way it was. And I know that there has, sometimes I'm never sure actually whether it's deliberate misunderstanding in the sense of, we choose not to understand this so that we have some mud to sling at you, or whether they really just don't get how the real world works. If it's the latter, that actually probably explains a great deal about the Hampstead hoax. But anyhow, so getting back to the trial. As we all know, in the end, Sabine was convicted on, I believe, 10 of the restraining order violations and all 4 of the stalking charges. The judge's remarks about the sentence that she gave, which to many people seemed extreme, the judge's remarks do explain quite clearly exactly why she chose to give Sabine that much time in prison. Now, of course, she will not be serving 9 years. Anyone who has anything, any knowledge of the prison system will be aware that most people, if they behave reasonably well while they're in, they usually get out on license for the last half of their sentence, and are merely, looked after by the probation service. And so it's highly unlikely that she'll be there for longer than maybe 3.5, 4 years. She has appealed her sentence, so we're still waiting to hear the results of that and to find out whether, at what stage that appeal is. We don't know much more other than what we've heard from Neelu, who is, let's just say, never the most reliable of sources. So that's it for Sabine for right now. There's probably a huge amount more that I'm just leaving out. I'm having to really skim here a little bit. But if there are questions, if there are things you'd like me to touch on in another video, if there are things you'd like me to, elaborate on and explain a little bit more clearly, please let me know. This video series, as I think I've told you, is a work in progress. I've never done this kind of thing before. It's all completely new to me. I'm learning things like, oh, you're supposed to have light shining on you at the time. You're not supposed to look like you're bathing in iron brew. But, who knew? So anyhow, so you can check out the box below the video, and I will put in links down there to the material that I've talked about today. And please let me know if there's other things that you'd like to hear about. You can find me at hoaxdeadresearch.wordpress.com, and I hope you have a wonderful few days, and I'll catch you next time. Take care.